Hi everyone, good day. So this day, we are going to learn about the first lesson in our Module 1, which is all about the learner-centered psychological principles. So when you hear the word learner-centered psychological principles, what comes into your mind? So in this meeting, we will learn everything about the learner-centered psychological principles. So first and foremost, we need to be guided with the different learning outcomes under in this lesson, which will be at the end of this lesson. As students, you are expected to, of course, explain the 14 principles, then advocate for the use of the 14 principles in the teaching learning process, because as educators, what is most important is the application of all the knowledge and theories that we have learned in every lesson. And lastly, of course, you're going to identify ways on how to apply the 14 principles in instruction as a future teacher. So 5 to 6 years from now, I know you will be all licensed professional teachers. So these theories are very important for you as future educators. Okay, so let's start. So, do you agree that the learner is the center of instruction, class? So, in this learner-centered psychological principles, the learner is the center of instruction because the world of instruction revolves around the learner. Then, also, this lesson introduces you to the 14 learner-centered psychological principles, which shall be used throughout this course as a guide in determining appropriate pedagogy for learners at different life stages. So as what I've said last meeting, that this course is very important because this serves as your foundation among all other major subjects that you will be taking up in the future. Then, so please examine the title, class, the learner-centered psychological principles. So again, what comes into your mind when you hear these words? Learner-centered psychological principles. So kindly go back to each word and write a phrase or phrases about why you think those words can be associated with learning-centered psychological principles, or in short, LCP. What are meant by learner-centered psychological principles? So first, the 14 psychological principles pertain, of course, to the learner itself and, of course, the learning process. So the 14 principles have the following aspects. So please take note, class, these different aspects of the 14 principles. So the first one is they focus on psychological factors that are primary, internal, or within the learners to and under the control of the learners. So of course, it's very internal. So when you say internal, it is under the control, of course, of the learners. Then, it also attempts to acknowledge external environment. So the 14 principles do not only focus on the internal factors, which is in the control rather of the learners, but also it also acknowledges the external factors, especially in terms of environmental and contextual factors that interact with these internal factors. Kay class, dili raman siya ni-focus merely on the control of the learners, but also it also acknowledge the interaction of both the internal and external factors. Okay? Then these principles are also intended to deal holistically. So we see holistically the cognitive, the psychomotor, and the affective domains of the learners are being touched. Then, with learners in the context of real-world learning situations. And it is best understood as an organized set of principles. So when we say organized set of principles, no principle should be viewed in isolation. So meaning, each principle, they are interrelated with each other. They are connected with each other. So that we do not need to isolate one principle to another principle. Then lastly, it is divided into 4 categories. So later on, we will discuss what are the categories in the 14 psychological principles. Then the principles are intended to apply all the learners Not only the students, but of course, children, of course, us as teachers. These 14 principles are very applicable to us, and administrators, the principals, the parents, and of course the community members involved in our educational system, or what we call the stakeholders. Okay? So next, we have here the 14 learner-centered principles that are divided into 4 categories. So the first category is under cognitive and metacognitive factors. So under metacognitive and metacognitive factors, we have 6 principles under on it. Then the next category is, of course, motivational and affective factors. There are 3 principles under motivational and affective factors. Then next will be the individual differences factors. Again, there are also 3 principles under on it. Then lastly, the last category for the 14 learner-centered psychological principles are the developmental and social factors. And it has 2 principles. Okay, so this time, we will discuss one by one each principle under each category. So the first category is, of course, cognitive and metacognitive factors. We say cognitive, it pertains to the brain, our mind, and metacognitive, how do we learn on our own? How do we think about thinking? So the first principle is the nature of the learning process. So we say the nature of the learning process, the learning of complex subject matter is most effective daw when it is an intentional process of constructing meaning from information and experience. So as students, our learning is most effective if it is intentional. So meaning, you are not forced by your mother, by your parents to go here or to enroll in school. In college, especially you educators, I really do hope that you are not being forced by your parents to enroll this program, which is education, because if that's the case that you are enforced, your learning is not effective kaayo in the other case. Then, successful learners are active. So of course, as 21st century learners, you need to be active. Not the opposite one is merely you are the recipients of knowledge nga kaming teacher, igot ni mo sulti kung unsa din mo. Kung unsa among ingon, maura po din yung i-absorb dira. But no, we should see the other side, which is being active learners. Then, of course, when you are active learners, you are goal-oriented. So we say goal-oriented or goal-directed, and everything you do, you set some goals on it. So naadyo kay giset nga goals na maudjud ako maabot. I will share this to you. I like this quotation which goes like this: begin in the end of mind. So meaning, in everything we do, we need to foresee what is the end of that every action or task that we do. Then of course, self-regulating. We need to control ourselves, what are our limitations, what are capabilities, and assume personal responsibility for contributing to their own learning. So as students, as learners, we do not merely rely on what our teachers gave to us, but as active learners, we are responsible in our own learning. So we need to find ways on how to learn more, not only nga kanang magsaligrat akong unsay gi-discuss ni ma'am, but especially nowadays class nga naa ta sa new setup of classes. So as students, please, kamo dyoy mo makatabang sa inyong self nga you need to find ways on how to learn. Then lastly, as teachers, please take note that as future educators, these are the things that we need to do. Please use techniques that aid students in constructing meaning from information, experiences, and their own thoughts and beliefs. So as teachers, we are facilitators of learning. We need to guide, facilitate our learners in order for them to construct their own knowledge. Dili kay ato silang spoon feeding sa different informations. But we need to guide them assess them para makadiscover sila on their own. So that is principle number 1. Let's proceed to principle number 2. So we say principle number 2, still under cognitive and metacognitive factors, goals of the learning process. So when I say goals of the learning process, the successful learner over time and with support and instructional guidance can create meaningful, coherent representation of knowledge. So as what I've said a while ago, that as teachers, we are facilitators of learning. We are here to facilitate, guide, and support our students for them to create a meaningful and coherent representation of knowledge. Then, as teachers, we need to create meaningful student learning goals consistent with their personal and educational aspirations and interests. So we have different students. Our students have different educational aspirations and interests. So let's make sure as teachers that we need to align our goals for the different aspirations and interests of our students. Okay, and everything we do, we need to have that what we call goal. Because if we have that goal, like the learning outcomes, when I share at the beginning of this video, we will be guided kung unsa jud ato ang dapat buhaton and ma-achieve in that particular task. Okay? Number 3, the construction of knowledge. So we say the construction of knowledge, the successful learner can link new information with existing knowledge in meaningful ways. So that's why in every lesson that we have as future educators and as kami teachers, it is very important that we need to have review in every lesson. So what is the use of the review, or why are reviews important? Because when we are going to have a review in every lesson, we can let our students link their previous knowledge or information to the new ones. So that's why if mag-open ta og new topics, it is very important nga dili na to kalimtan ang magkuan og review para makalink ang mga estudyante what are the relatedness or how is the previous lesson meaningful and can be applied in the new lesson. Then as teachers, mauni ato ang mga strategies na gamiton for us to achieve this principle, which is the construction of knowledge. So we need to use concept mapping. So I know you're very familiar with the concept mapping. We have different types and kinds of concept map. So in that way, we are going to let our learners link one major topic from the different like ato kani akong giingon nga, when you hear the word or words learner-centered psychological principles, what comes into your mind? So in that way, I am now linking your previous knowledge to that learner-centered psychological principles, because I know that you have your ideas about learner-centered. From the name itself, learner-centered, it revolves around the learner. Then psychological pertains to the brain, to the mind, the behavior of the students. And principles, what are principles? These are set of beliefs and theories that can be translated and be used in classroom settings. So in that way, we can link and that students can construct their own meaning. And of course, thematic organization and categorizing. So most of the tasks or activities that will be used in classroom are categorizing. So we let our students categorize ideas or things out from major concepts. So that's the perfect application of this principle, which is construction of knowledge. Then the fourth one, we have the strategic thinking. When we say strategic thinking, the successful learner can create and use a repertoire of thinking. So meaning many ways and strategies and reasoning strategies to achieve complex learning goals. So we can relate this to metacognition, which is thinking about thinking and learning how to learn. So if you have the metacognition, you're going to collect different strategies or methods that you can use in order for you to learn things on your own. Then as teachers, please take note that we need to assist learners in developing applying and assessing their strategic learning skills. So we say strategic thinking, we will focus on the higher order thinking skills, which are the applying, assessing, and evaluating. Okay? Then the fifth one is, this is what we call metacognition. Thinking about thinking or learning how to learn. What do you mean by thinking about thinking? Huna-huna, ang unsaon paghuna-huna, learning how to learn, pagkat-on, unsaon pagkat-on. So, it's very nice that as students, if you internalize and develop this principle within yourselves na mag-practice mo og metacognition, nga you need to think about your thinking and learn how to learn. So, especially in this new setup, this is very much nice kaayo ni siyang idea nga metacognition. So we say thinking about thinking, higher order thinking strategies for selecting and monitoring mental operations, facilitate creative and critical thinking. So this time, most of you are under category 1. So ingani ni siyang may tabo class nga you're going to study your own modules. So if there are some clarifications and dili maulaw ka ni teacher, but don't be shy nga mangutanan ni teacher. So, ingana lang atong tanawon nga, dili sa kamangutanan ni teacher because you are using the metacognition. So, once there are concepts nga nalibugan ninyo dira sa inyong modules, if you apply metacognition, you're going to use Merriam Dictionary or a dictionary, or you're going to research on the Google for reliable sources. Mangita mo pamaagi nga mas ma-explainan mo ana. So that is a perfect example of using metacognition or thinking about thinking or learning how to learn. Then, as teachers, we need to practice our students to reflect on how they think and learn. So we need to reflect on our own selves nga, saan ka na ako pagkat-on no? Saan ka nina ako no? Nga mas makakat-on ko more? Dili man enough ang i-discuss ni teacher, ni ma'am. So how can I find other ways that I will be makasabot ko taman? Then, we're going to set reasonable learning or performance goals, of course. Then, select potentially appropriate learning strategies or methods. There are many ways and strategies on how you are going to learn on your own. So, mo ganin ang nayuban nga, mas makakaton sila nga maminaw sa mga discussion is through concept mapping. So, ilaha po ng way nga unsaon nila pagkat-on or pagkasabot pa more. Then, monitor, of course, every time class, please monitor your progress towards this goal. So, once we set our goals, dili ra ta kutob anak klasa, kundi we need to monitor and evaluate whether we achieve those certain goals nga to ang set. Okay, so we are down to our last principle under cognitive and metacognitive factors, which is the context of learning. So this is also very important principle under the 14 principles. So we see context of the learning. Learning is influenced by environmental factors, including culture, technology, and instructional practices. So as teachers, we need to see to it nga, do we have a conducive learning environment? So we see conducive, nindot ba o ventilation? Dili ba naalimutan ang mga estudyante? Ang chairs are well arranged ba? Ang mga things ba are properly organized and arranged? So, dili ba saba ang palibot? So, we need to consider those factors kay it will really affect to the learning of our students. So, can you imagine class? Can you learn in your classroom or in your school if inyong environment is naisaba, na nagsagitay, naidagang sakyanan ni Agi, then ang inyong mga chairs are not properly arranged, nagkayamukat, ang mga silig tukog sa inyong broomstand is nagkayagaw na dira, wala na tarong og arrange. Can you learn that? So we need to consider those factors na para makahelp siya in our own ways nga mas ma-ready ta in learning. So as teachers, we need to make sure that our classroom environment, particularly to the degree to which it is nurturing or not, can also have significant impacts to the student learning. So please 5 to 6 years from now, please make sure na you have a very conducive learning environment. All the writings on the board are properly erased. Walay nagkasapaw-sapaw dira, and you have the proper facilities or mga, what you call that one? Mga appliances. You have the electric fan, the ceiling fan, para dili may lumutan ang mga bata. Kay can you imagine, class, kung nailimutan ng mga bata, makakaton ka na silang tarong? So we need to consider those factors. So those are the 6 principles under the cognitive and metacognitive factor. So let's proceed with our next category for the 14 learner psychological principles, which are the motivational and affective factors. So the first principle under motivational and affective factors, of course, is about motivational and emotional influences on learning. So please take note, class, that the motivation and the emotional factors influence or affect our learning. So what and how much is learned, it is influenced by the learner's motivation. So we say motivation, how eager we are going to learn something. So motivation to learn in turn is influenced by the individual's emotional states, belief, interest, and goals and habits of thinking. So as teachers, for us to help our students to develop motivation and emotional factors in their own selves, we need to help students avoid intense negative emotions. So let's focus more on the positive emotions rather than on the negative or most intense negative emotions. So for example of negative emotions are anxiety, panic. So, dili na to sila i-pressure, para dili sila magka-anxiety, dili sila magka-panic, and of course, insecurity. So, we need to treat each student fairly. So, wala siya dapat superior, inferior. So, dapat fair and balanced lang atong pagtrato sa tanan natong mga students. Then, unrelated thoughts, example, worrying about competence. So, it is not a good idea that we need to develop competence in each of our class. So we need to be fair, and instead of having competence, dapat magtinabangay, dapat cooperation, camaraderie atong i-develop rather than on the competence, and ruminating about failure. So mas dapat gani kitang teachers, we need to encourage our students for success and excellence, not for failure. I know failure, dili na to siya malikayan because it is part of our lives, but let's take failure as the positive side na niya rather than on the negative na dapat mag-suicide. So please have positive emotions and attitudes. Please be optimistic all the time. Let's see all the positive, mga positive vibes lang ta class, wala lang negative vibes. And fearing of punishment. So I hope once you will be a teacher, you will be authoritative teachers rather than authoritarian. So I say authoritative, balance lang. If you set rules, dapat po na yung mga rules. But you need to be fair. Na there are times that you need to be warm sa imuha mga students, not nga kanang strict na jud ka to the highest level. Then, there are many students who are afraid to be punished. So that's why ilan yung tawag noon ka nga terror or whatsoever. So please avoid that one, class. Okay, that is the 7th principle under 14 principles. So the next one is intrinsic motivation to learn. So by the way, class, there are 2 kinds of motivation. There is what we call intrinsic, and the other one is called extrinsic. So we say intrinsic motivation, it is a kind of motivation that comes from us within. So like in our principle number 1, the nature of the learning process is intentional. So once it is intentional, it comes from within, under the control of the learner. So meaning intrinsically. So even there are no rewards, there are no gift, or na ay other kapalit in return sa imuhang mga achievements especially in your studies, you are doing well in your classes, mag-study jud ka hard, Ayaw po ng harder. Study hard lang para ganahan ka makakuha og dako nga grado and mo graduate with flying honors because you are not expecting for any return. That is intrinsic. But when we say extrinsic, it is the opposite for intrinsic because you are doing well in your studies because imong mama niingon nga patan kag cellphone, moadto mo somewhere as a incentive or as a gift nga nagnindot ka sa imong klase or sa imong studies. So that is the extrinsic. So let's focus on the intrinsic because this is very important nga ma-develop ninyo tag sa class ang intrinsic motivation. So without anything in return in your own all achievements in your studies or in your life, so, nice kaayo ni siya kung ang yung i-develop within is the intrinsic. So, say intrinsic motivation to learn, the learner's creativity, higher order thinking, and natural curiosity all contribute to motivation to learn. So, intrinsic motivation is stimulated by tasks of optimal novelty. So, once you develop intrinsic motivation class, sa ako laging giingon, without any return, you're going to strive for excellence, being novel, nga dapat shoot imo ang buhaton kay nice kayo siya, dili ra kay okay ra nimo pasra ko kay basta lang makapas. No, that is the culture of mediocrity. But once you develop intrinsic motivation within yourselves, you're going to aim for excellence. Then difficulty relevant to personal interest and providing for personal choice and control. Then the last principle under motivational and effective is effects of motivation on effort. So once you are motivated to learn intrinsically, there is a big impact or influence on the level of effort that you have exerted. So kung ganahan kay ka ma-learn on your own, like imo nga juning gipili nga education program class, you are eager to learn. Dili kay napugos ra ka. So the more nga mas eager ka na to learn intrinsically, nga ganahan ka ani nga program nimo or course inyong naandan, you are eager more to learn in this program which is education. Dili kay ay unya na ng modules oy kay wala man ka naka-develop og intrinsically sa imong self-class, kundi extrinsically man. Kay ginan ka ni mama nimo, kung magmaestra ka day, tabang jud ka ayo na nato, kanang makaadto jud ka sa laing nasod, daghan jud ka ayo ka sweldo. So meaning, you are motivated extrinsically because of all those things sa salary sa maestra. But if you develop the passion in teaching, nice kay na siya jud class all the way because even unsa pa ang challenges nga imuhang na experience in your teaching profession, walay makatinag nimo because you love teaching jud and it is your calling. Then, and as teachers, for us, our students to exert effort in their learning, the acquisition of complex knowledge and skills requires extended learner effort and guided practice. So let's relate this with the first principle, which is nature of learning process is intentional. Once dili siya intentional nimo nga mo eskwela o BEd, so wala kaayo willingness to do the task under the course, different courses that are offered under your program, or even mga different assessment tasks nga ipaansiran sa imong teachers. Kaya dili man nimo gusto ang pag-education or pagka-maestra. So, without learners' motivation to learn, the willingness to exert effort is unlikely without coercion. So, that's why dili ka mo exert og effort in answering your assessment task. Mga na sa Ma'am Angel nga, study lesson 1 under module 1. Dili jud ka mag-study, kaya dili makaganahan sa program nimo. But if you have the intrinsic motivation, the willingness to learn in that program because it is your first choice, dili kay choice ni mama ni papa nimo, of course, you can exert maximum effort in everything you do under the education. So as teachers, for us, our students to exert more effort in everything they do, we need to make our task interesting and relevant, of course. Okay, so please take note, class, that we need to make our tasks, activities interesting and relevant. So dili kay ay ngano nga klase man mi ani, is it relevant? So how can your students develop the relevance of that lesson? Kundi connect your lessons in their real life situations and experiences. Okay, so we're done with the motivational and affective factors under the 14 principles. Let's proceed to the 10th principle, which is under developmental and social factors. So the first principle under developmental and social factors is developmental influences on learning. So not only the motivation affects learning, but also the developmental factors. So, as individuals develop, there are different opportunities and constraints for learning. So, we have many opportunities in the teaching learning process, and at the same time, we have many challenges that we need to face. Especially nowadays, we are now in the new setup, we are transferred into the online world or online classes or virtual classes. So, we have many challenges and problems nga atohang na-face karon. So, learning is most effective when differential development within and across physical, intellectual, emotional, and social domains is taken into account. So, we need to take into account the different dimensions of development, which are the physical, intellectual, emotional, and social, on how we interact with other people, especially your classmates and teachers. So as teachers, what should we do in order for us to develop these factors within our students? So as teachers, we need to use materials which are appropriate to the developmental level and is presented in an enjoyable and interesting way. So that's why as teachers, we need to find the materials that are developmentally appropriate, not only the materials, but everything, the content, the different activities. So for example, if we are teaching grade 1, dili jud ka mag-ingani no nga maggamit og mga PowerPoint, kundi you're going to use realia because those materials are developmentally appropriate depending on the age of your learner. So if you are teaching in higher levels, grade 6, so that's the time that magka-most abstract ka. Nga puros na lang ka-discuss sa math, no need na ka itong 1 plus 1, magdala ka og apple nga duha ka apple, o usa ka apple plus usa ka apple. Oh, pila ni class, duha, kay grade 1 man na. So it is very appropriate in their levels. But in grade 6, magdala pa kag apple, so you need to have the computation in your blackboard na lang, kay abstract mga numbers na lang mo, symbols. Okay? Then, enjoyable and interesting way. Like ato, akong gi-example, nga instead of writing ra sa grade 1 nga 1 plus 1 plus, it's very boring. But instead, use realias, mga objects nga maka-plus ka, maka-subtract ka, maka-divide ka, or whatsoever. Okay? So as teachers, we need to be creative in choosing the materials, the strategies that are very appropriate on the certain levels of our learners. Then, 11 is social influences on learning. So we say social influence on learning, social factors really affect the learning of the students. So learning is influenced, of course, by social interactions, interpersonal relations, and communication with others. So that's why in our classrooms, we are really required to use collaborative or cooperative strategies. So that's why, kung naa pa lang tatakaron sa face-to-face class, ako mismo, Ana, I'm very fun in using this strategy, which is collaborative and cooperative. So that's why na ay mga grouping si ma'am, kay because as one of the principle, it affects your learning. So maybe your other classmates have a better idea about that one. So need mo makig-brainstorm niya. Or maybe it will boost your confidence na naakay kauban instead of individual. So that's why social interactions, interpersonal relations, and communication with others is very important. So please take note that once you are a teacher na pohon, please do not forget to use cooperative and collaborative wherein your students will work with each other, help each other, dili kay mag-away. So dili pod kay magpa-cooperative and collaborative ka, imo ra silang biyaan kay nagpa-group works ka, kundi you need to be the facilitator of learning, mill around, check what happens sa ilang groups, and kung naay pangutana, much better for clarifications. So that is the 11th principle, which is all about social influences on learning. Then the 12th, we are down to our last category under the 14 psychological principles, which is the individual differences factors. There are last three. So when I say individual differences factors, of course, in a classroom, our students come from a diverse backgrounds, culturally, emotionally, biologically. So we need to take into account this principle, which is individual differences in learning. So learners have different strategies, approaches, and capabilities of learning that are a function of prior experience and heredity. So there are students who are below average, there are students who are average, and there are also students who are above average. So we need to consider class nga if you will become teachers, dili same ang mga capabilities and abilities sa imong students, kundi lahi-lahi. Naapoy uban nga makakat-on through visually, nga kana yung kinahanglan na ay writings on the board, dili ra merely nga nga discussion nga si ma'am nga nagtabi ra, which is auditory ra ang makasabot ani nga learners, but there are also learners who are called visual learners nga they need the representation or mga writings on the board. And there are also students nga need sila og manipulation, that's why nga kana mag-group activities, mag-manipulate og objects rather than on listening and seeing things nga di-discuss ni teacher. So that's why kabantay mo class, in every discussion or lesson that you have in your elementary or high school, your teachers will let you copy things, then naapoy magtabi si teacher, and after which paggrupuhon mo niya. So that's the combination of the visual learners para makater ang visual learners, auditory learners, and kinesthetic learners. So as teachers, we need to be sensitive to individual differences and vary instructional methods and materials. So that's why we have what we call differentiated instruction. We need to choose ng mga activities which are easy, sakto lang, moderate, and of course, difficult. Kaya if we're going to focus on one aspect lang, which is easy nga activities, how can you cater those students who are average and above average? So easy, chicken ra na nila ang mga activities. But if you're going to differentiate your instruction na ay easy, na ay moderate, and na ay difficult, so all the types of learners that you have inside your classroom can be catered. And maimo jung ma-focus sila tanan, dili kay ang usara ng group. So that's why po sa inyong exam na atay easy nga mga identification, ay ka-chicken raani, oy, mga matching type, naapoy mga mga essay, naapoy mga multiple choice nga lisod jud kay, because we're going to insert difficult questions para po na i-challenge ato ang mga above average learners. Okay? Okay, 13. Learning and diversity. So learning is most effective when differences in learners, linguistic, cultural, and social backgrounds are taken into account. So as what I've said a while ago, we need to consider learners' differences, or what we call students' diversity. So ang atong mga estudyante, there are students who are Roman Catholic, na ay Muslim, na ay gikan sa Manila, so meaning Tagalog iyang gamit nga pagsulti, na ay from here sa Cebu, Cebuano, na ay gikan sa Leyte, Waray, sa Bohol, and so on and so forth. So we need to adjust and we need to cater all our students. So na ay time nga atong i-translate ato ang language into Waray, kay naman tayo students nga kung that's mo po nang importante nga na abot ron is what we call mother tongue. So whatever the first language of our students, kung taga Cebu siya, we need to use Cebuano. But if they are from Leyte, So, the first language of them is Waray. So, we need to cater nga. Naatay times nga, mauni siya ha, ang English, ang Bisaya, lang kanang halumigas. Ang sa Manila, langgam. Lahi na siya ha, nga kuan. So, imo nang i-take into account ang different languages of your students. So, kung na ay Roman Catholic, then na ay Muslim, you need to cater or inyo yung i-respect ang ilahang pagka-diverse. So, if you have subjects or topics about religion, so you will not focus only in the Roman Catholic, you need to also pay respect sa Muslim or other religion nga naa sa inyong classroom. So, we need to practice, value, respect, and accommodate individual differences inside our classroom in terms of their abilities, backgrounds, cultures, and experiences in learning tasks and context so that levels of motivation and motivation are enhanced. So, if there are students nga mga magba, mga pareha na ko nga hanap na ang pananaw, nearsighted. So of course, i-place dyan na nimo sila in the front of your classroom. Dili kay ipaulahin na noon. So you need to take that class dyan. Everything inside the classroom, it is not very easy as a teacher. And the last principle is the standards and assessment. So this is the last principle under the 14 learner-centered psychological principles, which is the standards and assessment. So setting appropriately high and challenging standards and assessing the learner as well as learning progress, including diagnostic, process, and outcome assessment are integral parts of the learning process. So we see integral class, importante ni siya. Di ni siya mawala. So meaning, standards and assessment is an integral part in the teaching learning process. So di ni siya pwede mawala or ma-miss nato as teachers. So and every end, or not only in the end, during, at the beginning of our lesson, we need to assess our students. So we need to have evaluation, and of course, in assessing, we need to set standards. Now, for example, you need to get 7 or 8 out of 10. So, in that way, we set standard kung unsa jud ang dapat makuha sa ato ang students. So, again, in the teaching learning process, we need to have assessment from time to time. So, we have 3 kinds of assessment class. We have the diagnostic, formative, and summative. So, when we say diagnostic, it is a type of exam that is gihimo siya sa imuhang teachers at the beginning of the lesson. Then we say formative, it is a type of assessment that is done during the discussion. And when we say summative, it is most commonly done at the end of the lesson or for the whole unit. So please take note, class, that among the 3 assessment, only the summative should be recorded. So, ang atong diagnostic, kanang mag-exam si ma'am nga, dali po nag-exam ni ma'am, nga wapag mi nagklase. So, it is diagnostic, and don't worry, we do that to assess and to determine which is your weakness or strength in that topic. Then, for the formative, it is in the form of oral recitation, or kanang inyong buhaton nga, magpag-groupings usahay si ma'am, nga pa-answer sa board, mga board work. That is in the form of formative. And still, it should not be recorded. And lastly is the summative. Kanang summative test ninyo, or exam, or evaluation at the end of the lesson, or at the end of the whole unit or module. That is the summative. And dili na siya same sa diagnostic and formative na dili recorded, but it should be recorded and it will be included in your grade. So, those are the 14 learner-centered psychological principles, class. And as a summary, Alexander and Murphy gave a summary of 14 principles and distilled them into 5 areas. So please take note, class Annie. Number 1, the knowledge base. So the 14 principles touch the knowledge base. We say the knowledge base, once existing knowledge serves as the foundation of all future learning. So mo ta kong giingon nga, this course serve as your foundation in all the major subjects that you need to take up in the future when you mo proceed mo second year, third year, and you graduated. So example of this are all the learnings that you will learn in this course again will serve as a guide or foundation of all other courses that you will take up in the future. So please, ayaw mong ka-shock class na there are times in most of your courses in the future na magka-relate ra jud ni or magamit ni ang inyong nakatunan in this lesson or course nato. So that's what we call the linking of previous knowledge to the new ones. Then, the another aspect is strategic processing and control. So, learners can develop skills to reflect and regulate your thoughts and behaviors in order to learn more effectively, or what we call metacognition. So, the strategic processing and control, you need to learn on your own, think about your thinking, learning how to learn. And the third one is motivation and effect. So factors such as intrinsic motivation, which comes from within, reasons for wanting to learn, it is intentional. It is your own decision to take up this program, BE Ed or BS Ed. Personal goals and enjoyment of learning tasks also have a crucial role in the learning process. And the fourth one is development and individual differences that mo to ang last discuss kaniya sa 14 principles. So learning is a unique journey for each person because each learner has its own unique characteristic or combination of genetic and environmental factors that influence him or her. Diba? Wala may estudyante nga pariha. Every one of us is unique on our own way. We have this kind of abilities and our classmates has lain po ilaha. So please class, do not compare your mga kakayahan, inyong intelligence to other students kay it will lead to insecurity. So if naa siya ato, gifted siya ato, bright siya math, maybe you are gifted in other ways, not in mathematics, but in other aspects or subjects, which is mayo ka mo sayaw. So please, kana na lang atong tan-aw nga we are gifted. Gifted jud ta tanan class. We are given by God with all the intelligences. Ang nakaapan lang class is isa or duha ra ato ang na-develop or natuunan ng pansin. That's why mauna siya nilabaw nato nga mas maayo ta sa talking, kay ang ato ang linguistic ang atong more na-develop, or maayo ta sa dancing because we are good into music, mas nindot ta mo sayaw, kay mao sa atong matuunang pansin nga mga piltag mga DC or dance company, and so on and so forth. And the last one is the situation or context. So learning happens in the context of a society as well as within an individual. So ang atong learning will take place man jud inside the classroom, and as in the new setup, it takes place in your own home. So I hope in your own homes, free from noise, naadjud mo'y place dira nga maka-study mo, nga maka-concentrate mo, walay samok, walay saba. So it is very important class to consider. So the application of all the 14 learning principles will be done as we explore the succeeding modules or lessons pa aning a course. So please do not forget class the 14 principles, because again, these serve as our guide or foundation as we go on with our discussion with the next lessons or modules. And please keep all the 14 principles in your mind as we explore the rest of the lessons. Kaya na may time class naman ako, okay, the theories again, what principle ang na-touch ani? So please take note class, and please do not forget these 14 principles. Kay magka-second year mo, third year, fourth year, you can apply all these principles, and always try to relate these principles to the concepts that we will learn in the future. So not only in my subjects, but also in the other subjects class. So I hope you learn something from this lesson number 1, which is all about learner-centered psychological principles. If you have questions class, do not hesitate to message me in our group chat, in our MS Teams, and I am always there na mo reply dyan sa inyong mga queries or questions. Okay, so see you by next meeting. We will have another discussion on our lesson number 2 until module 1. God bless you and keep safe always.